Okay, first things first. A number of recent videos have seemed to have some sound issue. I'm hoping this one will be okay. If the problem persists, then obviously I'm going to have to do something about it. This is a new laptop, and so far I found that I haven't had the same sound problems as the last one, so that may just be a fluke. I may have accidentally pressed something. So I re-uploaded those videos. Anyway, I've still a bit of editing to do. Hopefully this one will be okay. Um, I've been watching a channel recently which I highly recommend. It's called Bedtime Stories. You may be familiar with this channel. They cover a whole range of interesting cases, unsolved murders, paranormal cases, interesting concepts. It's a very good channel, and it's done in a very professional and respectful way, because often obviously it involved crime and victims of crime. Um, but I've kind of been on a bit of a binge watching those videos, and the subject I'm going to talk about here came from one of those videos. But I just want to kind of give credit to Richard Weil, who's the narrator, and Mickey Tarkanu, who provides illustrations for that channel. So check it out, Bedtime Stories. If you just type in Bedtime Stories, it sounds like it's for children, but it's not. It's really not when you look at some of the content. It's done in a very professional and respectful way. Check it out. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the phenomenon known as the Mandela Effect. Um, Basically, this concept, it's also known as false memory, but it's got its current sort of the name comes from the fact that when Nelson Mandela died in 2013, there was a phenomenon reported that a lot of people who heard the news were confused because they believed that Nelson Mandela had died whilst imprisoned in the 1980s. It's a very strange thing because, of course, it was well documented that he was released from prison as the apartheid regime collapsed. He went on to serve as president of South Africa for 5 years, and he was one of the world's most respected elder statesmen. And yet, many people believed somehow that he had died whilst imprisoned in the mid 80s. There are other examples of this both in poignant geopolitical events and in popular culture. So, thinking of geopolitical events, famous ones, the Kennedy assassination, a lot of people who were alive at the time, it actually occurred on my mother's 10th birthday. A lot of the people who were alive at the time seem to recall that famous footage of the motorcade from the Zapruder film. They seem to recall four people in the presidential limousine. So JFK, Jackie, Governor Connolly, and his wife. But there were six people because two of the security personnel were also in the vehicle. Yet people seem to have this memory that there were only four. Now, why is that? Could it be that the famous footage focuses on obviously the lethal shots and that's focused in the middle of the limousine where the president was seated? Or is it that something more strange is at play here? Um, there are other examples. There was actually, I'm not sure if this relates to the Mandela effect, but there was an urban legend that Paul McCartney had died in the late 60s. Although this was more an urban legend, the Paul is dead thing was a big phenomenon apparently. That Paul McCartney had actually died in the late 60s and the Beatles replaced him. And the man going by the name Paul McCartney is an imposter ever since. I don't really buy that, but supposedly there was a lot of cryptic clues in Beatles albums. It's a slightly unnerving idea though. But keeping to the Mandela effect, I have my own thoughts on this. So in bedtime stories, they theorize. I mean, what I like about the channel is they're very balanced. They don't they're not biased one way or another. They are both arguments, both skeptical and believing, because they cover a lot of famous cases like the Borley Rectory haunting here in the UK. Um, In terms of popular culture, we can think of famous lines from well-known films. So Star Wars, almost everyone quotes that famous line in the end when Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are in a confrontation as Luke, I am your father. Actually, it was I am your father, I believe. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but I think that was the actual line. Another one is from Forrest Gump, the famous scene where he's sitting on the bench talking to random people. Well, what is that famous line? Mother always said life is like a box of chocolates. Except the actual line is, Mother always said life was like a box of chocolates. Now, we assume at this point his mother has passed away, but even so, grammatically it sounds like a strange thing to say, even for a man with learning difficulties as the character is. So why is it the collective memory has it as one line when the reality was it was another line? And I'm sure you can find examples in popular culture. Um, the famous so-called hanging munchkin scene in The Wizard of Oz may be another one. Although that's an urban legend that kind of developed. I don't know when it developed, but there are some people who insist that when the DVD version was released, it was somehow censored or covered up. The official line from, I think it was MGM launched the film, was that it was filmed at a zoo, and what people actually assumed was a hanging munchkin was a pelican or some sort of big bird in the background just stripping its neck. A stork, in fact. The argument for a hanging munchkin was the supposed theory that the actors who played the munchkins were treated badly on set. There were certainly ethical issues going on in the sense that they weren't paid. Um, Toto, the dog, was paid more than the actors who played the munchkins were. And there has been a lot of sort of speculation over what happened with Judy Garland and so on. But anyway, I'm divulging into another realm. History, another example, is the famous Challenger disaster in 1986. That's when the disaster happened. But somehow a lot of people think it was 1983. Now, I have a theory about this. Um, Personally, I have a very sort of, without wanting to sound braggadocious, I have a very astute concept of time and place when it comes to famous events because I follow the news closely and I collect newspapers. So you can give me any year in modern history, I could mention all the major world leaders of that time, for example. I can even roughly recall the period in office of every major world leader off the top of my head. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981, right? So that's just an example. I'm not saying that to be braggadocious, but the point is I have an interest in it. Now, there's other fields I know little about, and I wouldn't be able to memorize things that well. So I think that even with well known events like the Kennedy assassination, like the moon landing, like September 11th attacks, people register the main details of them. So they remember the president was assassinated, they remember Armstrong's famous speech. In fact, that may be another one. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. There's some debate over what the exact line is. Um, and a lot of focus on that, of course, with this year being the 50th anniversary. And with September 11th, they remember the horrible images of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers. But when you get into some other details, if you ask someone what year did the September 11th attacks occur, a lot of people will accurately say 2001, but there'll be a surprisingly high number of people who actually need to think about it, even though this is one of the best known events in human history, in modern human history. Um, so there is a theory that there is actually a parallel dimension to our world whereby very similar things are going on, but in a slightly different sequence of events. And this may explain so called time traveling cases or people kind of being locked into time slips. That in the other dimension, there is nothing unusual. but sometimes these two dimensions get crossed over, and this parallel world is so close to ours that it's very easy for people to slip in and out. So in this parallel world, Barack Obama is still president, and we're not in the year 2019, we're in the year 2015. So the differences could be quite subtle, but it's um, it's a very interesting and slightly unnerving thing, actually. I mean, even the name Mandela Effect. I actually remember hearing Mandela Effect. Now, of course, I know Mandela was the name of the president, but well, why do I somehow subconsciously remember Mandela? Another phenomenon is apparently a children's book series, which I wasn't familiar with. Apparently, it was called the Berenstain Bears. Now, everyone remembers it as the Berenstain Bears. Apparently, people, I wasn't familiar with the series, but people who followed that series. And so when it transpired that it actually was spelt with an AIN as opposed to an EIN, which is more common, people responded with great surprise. So there is a conspiracy theory that big companies subtly change details, almost like subliminal messaging. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And yeah, I'd like to know, what do you think of this? Do you think it's a real thing? Do you think it's exaggerated? Um, I mean, the thing is, you can't dismiss this as someone just forgetting details, because in some of these cases, we're talking about many, many people having the false memory. Why is that? A famous example of this, or one of the cited examples, is there's supposedly a clock in the train station in the Italian city of Bologna. In 1980, Bologna was the scene of a terrible far right terrorist attack, a bombing. I believe over 80 people were killed, and the clock actually stopped at the moment of the bombing. What actually happened was, apparently the clock got fixed and restored, and was back to working order. But the collective memory of a lot of people was that that clock was frozen in time at the moment of the blast. I've never been to Bologna, so I don't know what the truth is. So there's many, many examples of this. Now, the historic fact is Nelson Mandela died in 2013 at the age of 95. He served as president of South Africa. He famously was freed and the apartheid system collapsed. That is the history. Yet people somehow remember him dying in the 80s. It may be that they're getting crossed over with Steve Biko, because people who don't follow geopolitics closely will probably know who Nelson Mandela is, but they may get some of the details mixed up. So they may be getting him mixed up with another famous civil rights leader, Steve Biko, who did die in police custody in the 80s, 1985, I believe, the year I was born. So this whole concept is very interesting, and I'd be interested to know, what do people think of it. Have you had any personal experiences? Do you have any theories? Do you think there's nothing to it? It's all overblown. I think it is a very interesting and slightly unsettling phenomenon, but very interesting. Let me know your thoughts, and check out the channel Bedtime Stories. It's a fascinating channel, very well made, and hopefully the sound will be okay on this video.